People of Redemption, I am so thankful that in this unique and challenging season, we are still able to gather together, even if it's only virtually. I would encourage you, go ahead and share this video, share the message of hope that we are about to explore right now. Now, last week, we began talking about a really relevant topic in our culture, fear. Now, this week, I was looking at some different phobias, and I found some funny ones that I want to tell you. There's a phobia called arithmophobia. You know what that is? That's the fear of numbers. I know some of you are scared of numbers. Logophobia. I know many of you know what this is. This is a fear of reading. How many of you? Go ahead, raise your hand. Xanthophobia. I've never heard of this one until now. This is the fear of the color yellow. I know, weird, right? Octophobia. This is even weirder. Fear of the number 8. Don't get it at all. But I know many of you will identify with this final one. Nomophobia. You ready for this? Fear of not having a mobile phone. I know many of you can relate there. Now, while those are kind of funny, I know many of us are experiencing real fear. Even if it's just a little bit, we're experiencing some level of stress, of frustration, of worry, of fear. So as we're exploring fear, one of the things that we looked at last week is fear always has something underneath it. Something is always fueling our fear. It's driving our fear. And what our fears really do is they just expose what's inside of our hearts. So right now, if you're scared and I'm scared, what's happening is a revealing of what's inside of us is really taking place. It's always being fueled by something. It's always being guided and directed by something deep inside of us. And so one of the things that we're going to do over these next couple of weeks is kind of peel back that onion. So what are the things that are driving us to be scared? What are the things that are driving us to be fearful people? Think about an iceberg. If you've ever done any research on an iceberg, you realize that only 10% is actually exposed from sea level, 10%. The other 90% is below the surface. And so for us, we're exploring the 90%. We know that we're fearful. We see that, we're experiencing that, but what is driving it? What is underneath all of this? That's what we're exploring right now. What we're going to explore specifically today is control. Many of us are fearful because we lack control in the situation. Think about this. Are you finding yourself just kind of worrying because the future's uncertain? Have you found yourself being mad or frustrated or angry that things are not going according to your plans? You may struggle with control. Think about this. Do you lack maybe a meaningful prayer life, a dependence upon the Lord? Well, if you're anything like me, we could say, okay, I may struggle with control. And so I want us to turn to some truths found in the New Testament in the book of James. The book of James was written by Jesus' half-brother. He is a leader in the church in Jerusalem, and he pens this letter to Christians in the first century. And this is what James says in James chapter 4, verse 13 and 14. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Now, James is dealing with kind of an idea in the early first century that has continued on even to our time. It's this thought that I am the master of my own fate. I control my life. I control my destiny. I mean, think about some of the cultural sayings that we have. Seize the day. You control your destiny. You can be anything you set your mind to. And we slowly and subtly slip into this illusion that we control everything. And James is saying, hey, some of you right now, you're planning, you're saying, hey, I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to go do that, and I'm going to go do this business venture and travel to this location. And he's like, whoa, you need to be really careful about your heart as you're making these plans. Don't slip into this illusion that you control everything. Now, I do want to talk about these sayings that we have, like seize the day and you control your destiny. In some part, I appreciate them. I appreciate them in the sense of, hey, we should be working hard. We should be determined. It's okay to focus on things. But we do all that with an open hand. Like if you need a job right now, and you're just saying, hey, Lord, provide, and I'm praying about it. That is awesome. You should pray about it. You should also be applying for jobs right now, right? One of my favorite memes during this season is Jesus, he's knocking on a door and he goes, hey, Karen, I know you keep saying that you're trusting me with your health, but you should also wash your hands and do that social distancing thing. You know what I'm saying? So I get it. Like we need to work hard and be motivated, but James gives us a very, very clear caution. See, we think we're in control of everything and in control of our lives, but he goes, what does he say in verse 14? Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know. It's uncertain. We can't control it. Tomorrow's not going to conform to my will and what I want. Yes, I need to work hard and I need to strive and I need to be determined, but I can't control it. He's going, I want you to be really, really cautious. Tim Keller, he would say, there's moments in our life where we're confronted with our cosmic nakedness, or literally our cosmic powerlessness. That we understand that there are going to be moments in our life where we're just confronted with our lack of control. And I could say this, there's been no other point in my life outside of this time right now in which I'm going, you know what, Lord, I don't have control. Like I'm keenly aware of my lack of control as the next stat rolls out, as the next kind of news update, like, Lord, I just don't control my life, the rest of our lives, what's going to happen tomorrow. I just don't have that kind of control. You realize that most of our lives is completely out of our control. Now, certainly, God gives us personal choice, and of course, that affects and helps determine our life. But think about the things that you don't choose. You don't choose your genetics, right? I mean, you look the way that you look because of a genetic pool, right? Think about this, the environment in which you were brought up in. You just don't control that. I love what Tim Keller would go on to say. He would say 95% of what sets the course of our lives is completely out of our control. This includes the century and place we are born in, who our parents and family are, our childhood environment, physical stature, genetic hardwired talents, and most of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. In short, all we are and have is given to us by God. And that is a truth that we need to rest in right now. There was a book written by Malcolm Gladwell. It's called Outliers, and he went around studying successful people, and he wanted to understand, why are certain people successful, more successful? And he found that sometimes it was just factors completely out of our control. For example, he found out that most professional Canadian hockey players that are in the NHL were born in the first half of the calendar year. In fact, he found out that twice as many have birthdays in the first quarter of the year than the last quarter of the year. Why? Because that determines so much about little leagues, and as they were growing up and playing little hockey leagues, they were always the oldest. They were always the most mature. See, they didn't control when they were born. They didn't control their talents. Certainly they could work hard and practice hard, but there were many, many factors that were just completely out of their control. And so James is encouraging us. He's saying, I want you to not be delusional, thinking that you have complete and total control over your life. No, we have very, very little control. So what happens is when we recognize how little we control, what it does is it begins to fuel the fear flame in most of us. We recognize, oh my goodness, I can't control this virus. I can't control the economy. I can't control my job situation right now. No matter how hard I work, I can't control it. And we become fearful people. So what do? Well, good news, James is not done telling us about how we change our perspective and what truths we rest in. So I'm going to encourage you, stick around as we continue to explore the sovereignty of God. Hey, welcome back. In the first part of the sermon, what we learned is a lot of us live under this illusion that we have complete and total control over our lives. And James gives us a very great caution that we do not have the control that we think we have. And so what happens is when we are confronted with what we called our cosmic nakedness, that we're finite, that we don't have complete and total control, we become very fearful people, realizing I can't control the outcome here. What's going to happen? I need power. I need control. What's going to help us rest during the season when we are confronted with a great pandemic, when we're confronted with an economy that has lost jobs and potentially our jobs on the line? How do we handle this and rest in our lack of control? Well, James is going to continue on and help us gain a proper perspective of life. James chapter 4, verse 15. He says, instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So James, what he does is he appeals to the will of God. What God wants, God gets. What God desires, it will come to fruition and come to pass. Now, there's a really clear delineation here that James is drawing for us. It's a delineation between creator and creation. See, we're creation. We have very limited control over our lives, over our health, over the economy, over what's happening in this world today. And yet he is creator. He has complete and total control. He still sits on the throne. The entirety of scriptures points to this distinction between creator and creation. There's questions like, where were we when the foundations of the earth were laid? How did all of this come to pass? Who holds all of this together and makes it sustainable? The answer to those questions is always God. God, he was there when the foundations of the world were laid. Why? Because he was the one that laid them. This world, it lives and breathes and moves and is sustainable. Why? Because he holds all things together. Are you seeing this delineation between creation and creator? He is the great one. And so here's a truth that we can simply rest in. Are you ready for this? We control little, but God controls everything. Let me say that again. We control little, but God controls everything. And the reason why we worry, the reason why we get mad and frustrated when the plans that we were laying out just don't come to fruition, the reason why we can even be judgmental when people don't conform to what we want them to do and how that we want them to act, it's because of control. We're trying to control everything when we don't live in the truth that we control little, but God controls everything. Now, here's some corresponding truths to that. Because again, if we don't have control, we're like, well, how can God be trusted? I mean, if I'm not in control of everything and I can't affect the outcome, like how can I trust God? Well, first and foremost, go back to the Garden of Eden. See, when we tried to take advantage, when we tried to take control of everything, when we get this great offer to be like God, we ruined everything. What we see is when we try to control situations, it always ends up badly, always. Yet what we see when God is in control and we recognize that and we submit to that, when his ownership of everything and his sovereignty are recognized, then guess what happens? All good comes. Why? Because he's two things. He's sovereign and he is good. By sovereign, I mean he's in complete and total control. Nothing is out of his rule and reign. He sits on the throne forevermore. He sat there from eternity past. I mean, he will always sit on the throne. And not just that, but he is good. The scriptures go to great lengths to teach us that he is a good father, that he is kind and merciful and gracious and good. And you know what he did in the mess of sin? See, we've messed everything up. We've tried to gain control of everything, and it's just went awry. It's just went bad. He steps in his sovereignty, and he begins to fix all of our mistakes. He begins to right all of our wrongs. See, he devises this plan in which he sends his one and only son, Jesus, to live a perfect, sinless life, then die on a cross in our place for our sins, and 3 days later, rise victorious, showing that he's completely sovereign and good, even in the midst of our mess, and that he can be trusted because, again, he takes what we have messed up, what we have broken, and he makes good out of it, so that you and I are offered salvation. So what do we do with all this? Where do we go with this new perspective that we control little, but God controls everything? Well, the first is simply submit yourself to Jesus. Maybe you've never trusted Jesus for the first time. Maybe you've been trying to control your life, your entire life, and things just haven't worked out well. Well, maybe this is God knocking on all of the doors of our hearts saying, hey, I want you to recognize, I want you to be sensitive, I want you to be receptive to this truth that I'm in control and you don't have to be any longer. And we would submit ourselves under God's authority. We would say yes to Jesus. We would turn away from our ways and we would repent and turn to his ways. So if you've never trusted Jesus, I would encourage you today, trust him. We're confronted today that we are not in control, but he is in control and he is good. And we know this because of Jesus. We know this because of the gospel. And even if you're here today and you've trusted Jesus and you've been trying to control your life and do it your own way, today it's just simply submit to him. Like, come back home. Say, Lord, I'm sorry. I'm gonna submit myself to your authority and your rule. Second, I would encourage you to find evidences of God's grace in your life. Like, if everything is from God, and we just saw that stat, that 95% of our life are just things that are outside of our control, that means that the good things in our life right now are graces of God. They're evidence of his goodness. So right now, you may be sitting at home and your job may be on the line, but look at the people that you sit beside. People that you dearly love, a family, kids, a spouse. Think that tonight when you go to the dinner table that there's food on the plate. Why? Because he is gracious and good. It's just evidence of his grace all around us. All we have to do is open up our eyes and we see his goodness. And in times of fear, and we're like, oh, I can't control. He's like, no. Remember, I have placed my goodness all around your house, all around your home, all around your life. And last, I would encourage you, don't create your own picture of what redemption should look like. What I mean by that is many people are like, God, I'll follow you if you do this. And we kind of give God an agenda, our agenda of what we want him to do and how we want him to do it. And we're like, God, redeem us this way. And that's not how this works. See, the process of growing in Jesus often looks far more different than we had ever planned. But because he's good, it is for our good. I found sometimes in my life, I've laid these well-laid plans out that God, it should look like this. Tomorrow should look like this. A year from now should look like this. And then when those plans don't happen, when I have to alter course, I've got to hold that with an open hand going, God, everything you do is for your glory and my good. And I just trust you with it. So I'm not going to hold this picture of what it should look like in front of you. I'm simply going to, as a creation, as something that's been created, I'm going to submit to my Creator and say, Lord, I trust you. So friends, remember this. While we may control little right now, he controls everything. He sits on the throne and he is good and he can be trusted. I hope this encourages you today.